Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Hey, Glenn here. Welcome to Funnel Reboot, where we explore how to upgrade our lead generation. Today, we're diving into conversion rate optimization. But first, let me remind you that I really want to hear what you want me to talk about in a future episode. So please, give your feedback. Reach out to me on Instagram or on Twitter at Funnel Reboot. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. You can leave a message via the form at funnelreboot.com or an audio listener feedback via the line 613-703-7073. Okay, so for today's topic, we all want to improve how many conversions we get on our websites. A lot of the time, we try to do that by rearranging the layout or switching up page elements. We do that, and then we wait a while and we go to our dashboards and we see if our number went up or down. You've probably spotted the flaw in this. This is circular reasoning. A change in customer behavior can't be proven by, quote, looking back at the data, trying to decide whether or not it was some sort of change that we made, as conversion expert Matt Gershoff puts it. So what's the right way to do this? It's simple. Reverse the order of events. Start off with a hunch about what you should change. Run an experiment on your customers or users, proving or disproving if the thing you believe caused the behavior actually has that effect. There's a whole discipline around this. It's called CRO, which stands for Conversion Rate Optimization. And there's someone who's superbly qualified to talk about this. I'm lucky to have known her for the past few years. Our guest unknowingly ran her first optimization study in school at the age of 8, when she put her classmates through a science experiment where they looked at pieces of construction paper tacked on a Bristol board. That same person grew up and earned a Master of Science degree, specializing in eye tracking technology. Today, she applies her specialized skill set to conversion rate optimization. She's founded a well-known resource website where she has published hundreds of client A/B test case studies. She also has a certificate in graphic design, giving her the blend of left and right brain thinking that's just right for working in CRO. Some things that you should listen for in this talk include explaining what minimum traffic constraints we're under for A/B tests and why, with small volumes, we're really better to put 2 pages into a test where only one thing has changed versus trying to test multiple pages at the same time or multiple variables on pages at the same time. Marketers who run paid search and paid social ads will want to listen carefully to what she has to say about mixing traffic from various channels together in a test. And she has some tips on how we can maintain objectivity as we run our tests and as we present the results to our leadership. Let's go hear from Deborah O'Malley. I'm really pleased to welcome to the show, Deborah O'Malley. Welcome, Deborah.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be with you, Glenn.
Thank you. I'm really glad to have you. And I'm really glad that you can help demystify CRO for us. So why don't we start by, a very quick definition and the idea why we want to try to use testing to optimize our experiences.
Absolutely. So a very quick and dirty definition of CRO, or conversion rate optimization, as it's known. It's a process or a system that uses data and modeling for information. Now, I'm going to stop there because that in itself is not very clear. And you might have heard data and went, oh my gosh, I'm freaked out already. Or you might have thought to yourself, well, where does this data come from? So let's start with the data aspect of it, because CRO is inherently a very data-driven process, or at least it should be if it's done properly. So first off, you get data from typically analytics platforms. things like Google Analytics, heat mapping tools like Crazy Egg or Hotjar, and you delve into that data to learn things about your users. Things like where are they coming from? What are they doing on your site? How are they interacting with your site? And you look at this data to gather and apply insights and learn your users and the behaviors. And in doing so, you can start to understand your audience and put together a picture about them and figure out the best way to get them to convert. All right, so that's the first part of conversion rate optimization is the word convert itself. So what does it mean to get a user to convert? Well, if you think about it in the typical sense, like a religious or financial context, you often get a person to convert when you change them from one religion or currency to another. And in the religion of web optimization, conversions are really similar. So a conversion is the completion of a specific goal or a desired action on your website. And that's a grossly simplified over explanation of it, but that's the essence of it. You want them to take an action on your website. So, depending on your website and what your website is set up to achieve, the currency of your conversion can take many different forms. So, if you're in the B2B space, you may be trying to generate leads or obtain a prospective customer's contact information. And for you, a conversion is getting somebody to input their email address and maybe it's sign up for your newsletter or download a resource that you're offering. Much different in e-commerce. A conversion is a lot more obvious. It's usually about trying to get the shopper to make a purchase and to increase your revenue. If you go into the inbound marketing space, it might be about getting clicks to your website or bringing somebody into a newsletter article, getting engagement. So a conversion can really take a lot of different forms depending on what your goal of your website is. But what your job as an optimizer in conversion rate optimization is to get them to make that conversion, and doing so is going to lead to higher conversion rates on your site. And that is the essence of conversion rate optimization.
I love it. And just so we don't leave that lonely R out, um, it would be, I would be remiss if I didn't say we're going to take a quick little quotient, which is the number of people who completed the action divided by the number of people who had the opportunity to complete the action, but either did or didn't.
You got it.
Okay.
That's exactly it. So it's the rate of users to actual people who perform the action.
And let's talk about that for a second. So they they're not a homogenous group. They kind of fall along a spectrum if we think about it. If I am on a web page and the web page is asking me to do something, which that marketer who made it thinks of as a conversion, I could either get there and say, oh, I took a wrong turn. I'm out of here. I could come and immediately say yes. I could come and immediately say no, or I might sit there. I'm not sure. Maybe I enter one or two fields of information, but I'm really in a maybe camp.
Right.
Does conversion rate optimization worry about all those people, or is it actually the art of working on a subset of that entire group?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting example you gave. So the first example you said is somebody will come to the website and immediately leave. So in conversion rate optimization, that's called a bounce. Somebody bounces off your website. And you can think of it like a basketball that hits the court and boom, right away they're gone. So that's not a conversion. It's a bounce. It's the opposite of a conversion, if you will. But it's really important information because we can look at that data. And remember, we started our definition with saying it's a data driven model. We can look at that data and say, our users are bouncing. We have a very high or heavy bounce rate. The website is not optimized. And let's figure out why that is and what we can do to change it. The other two examples you gave were of people who are kind of, maybe I'm interested, or people who make a beeline and know they're interested right away. Those are what I would call either high or low intent users. So the low intent users, they somehow ended up on your site and maybe they saw an ad and it piqued their interest, and now they're coming to your site to explore. They don't have a lot of conversion intent or necessarily interest in making a purchase or signing up, whatever your conversion objective is, but they want to explore a little bit more. And it might take them 2 or 3 or 5 times to actually perform the action that you want them to do. And that's why retargeting and exposure to your product or service is so important. Then there's the really high intent people. They absolutely know, they heard from Glenn that your company is the best and they want to go with you for consulting. They don't need any convincing. They just need to sign up. Boom, they're in. Those are the people everybody loves, but there's not all that many of them. Usually you have to nurture that lead a lot. And then the last kind of person is actually, I don't remember what the example was, but um,
I think we covered the yes nos. We're pretty much just trying to make sure that any of those maybes are not going to turn into no's because there was something bad or missing in the experience, right?
right. So that often happens. And that really is the essence of conversion rate optimization. So when you think about a website, marketers generally like to depict it using the analogy of a funnel. And so if you think of a funnel, it has a wide shape at the top where visitors or users come in from, and then a very narrow shape at the bottom. And that's kind of the conversion or the money that comes out of the funnel. Every step along the way, every path the user takes to take that conversion can be a potential leak or hole in the funnel. And as a conversion rate optimizer, your job is to figure out where those leaks are happening so that users aren't abandoning or leaving or deciding that this is not the product or service for them. And so it's figuring out how to make that optimal frictionless experience that really facilitates the user to flow in through the funnel all the way down to the conversion.
You've got a background in science, and just the words that you're using to describe this feels very laboratory like. Is it fair to say that, what you're doing here is you're trying to observe the users and you're trying to find a way to see if you could remove those friction points by understanding what they are. And to do that, you pretty much have to take a guess, right?
It it's an educated guess. It's a data-driven guess, which is also known in the science realm as a hypothesis. And it is definitely laboratory work. I like to think of it as concoction and mixing little chemical vials together and seeing what's going to happen. Vial A and vial B, and does it work or not? And you're spot on, because people in this realm, they call it experimentation. And it's funny, I've seen the evolution of going from people calling it split testers to A/B testers to optimizers. And now the word or the lexicon that everybody seems to be using in the field is experimenters or experimentation.
Yep.
And that's truly what it is. It's all about experimentation and finding the optimal um, format for your website. You'll never find the perfect, because things are always changing. Your user cohort is always changing. The circumstances are always changing, but you want to be able to find the optimal way to present the information to your users.
Sure. So I think everybody listening to this can intuit that an A and a B are two variations. A is probably the way the page originally was, and then B, you are making some change, and your educated guess as to what the problem is with version A is baked into version B. Can you give me either an example or maybe some tips on how someone gets to that hypothesis? You mentioned heat maps already, so maybe you could give us an example with that.
Yeah, so there's really kind of a 5-step format that I would recommend to anyone who's interested in doing this. So the first is really knowing your audience. And there's an acronym, it's called KYA, Know Your Audience. That's absolutely crucial. You have to understand who they are, what the demographics are, what the age range is, where they live, what language they speak, what interests them, and ideally what keeps them awake at night. When you have a really good sense of your audience, you're able to use the language that will appeal to them, really speak to them, and tune into their needs and desires. And that's where the magic can start to happen, because you can really literally speak to them. To understand your audience, there's different ways to do it, both qualitative and quantitative, but all of it involves data. So you can do user experience testing and speak to your users, find out what they like, what they don't like, what they find frustrating about your site, what they enjoy about your site. You can poll users, find out why they're in your site in the first place, what they're doing. You can also look at analytics data, like for example, Google Analytics. Almost all websites have it set up, and it's a free platform to use. And you can see, we talked about bounce rate earlier. Are users bouncing? Are they engaging with your page? How long are they spending on a certain page? Are they clicking on certain things? Are they triggering different events or goals that you have set up? And use that data to paint a picture of how is your user behaving. My absolutely favorite tool is heat mapping data. Now, I have a little bit of a bias. I did a master's of science degree with a specialization in eye tracking technology. And the eye tracking technology allows you to look literally where people's eyes are looking at a screen on an XY coordinate on the screen. And you can see what are called fixations, which is the amount of time somebody's fixating or looking at the screen, and where the eye is going across the screen and gazing. And you can actually do what's called a gaze plot, which is looking at the movement of the eye across the screen. Most marketers aren't using heat mapping data because it's very laboratory intensive to set up, but the close second or the close cousin to that is heat mapping data. And I think
I
think
get,
I
yes. Eye tracking data is the expensive one because
eye tracking.
you literally have to like plunk apparatus on someone's head or
Yes,
have it in the room.
have a very specialized multi-million $1,000 screen.
Okay,
But
but am I
heat
right
mapping
that
data.
this thing I'm holding in my hand, a mouse, this is the proxy for that because I usually will put my mouse where my eye is going.
There you go. You got it exactly. And so there's mouse tracking software, and there's also what's known as heat mapping software. And what it does is it shows clicks, it shows scrolls, and it shows where people are focusing the most amount of attention on a screen. And it gives you what are called heat maps, which are hot spots that are different colors. And you can see where people are interacting with your site, where they're scrolling past, if they're scrolling down a certain point on your screen, and you can get a very comprehensive picture of what users are doing on your site and how they're performing on your site. And it's very revealing. So, heat mapping data that I've tuned into, I've been able to see, for example, people are clicking on an element that's not clickable.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big problem. When people keep clicking on an element that they can't click on and it doesn't go anywhere, that causes a lot of frustration. A frustrated user doesn't convert. So, seeing that, you're able to go, okay, we need to make this element, for example, not clickable. And all of a sudden, the friction points reduce and people are more likely to flow through your funnel.
Yeah, this is the whole. I think my website is perfect. I don't see any particular problem with it. And yet the data is going to show me that other people disagree. And many of them feel that, they should be able to do something that they can't do, or they aren't seeing what they want to see. So, getting right back to that hypothesis, this is us noticing a problem. We can either use historical data, or if we really don't have anywhere to start, we can at least use possibly some best practices out there to say, the way we've done it doesn't seem like it would be as easy a flow as how someone's doing it on our competitor's site. So you
Right.
get that data, you make the hypothesis, you say, I think if we make this change, then our conversion rate will go up.
Yeah, exactly. So that's step one, is getting the data. And step two is really formulating a smart hypothesis. And I emphasize the word smart because it really has to be more than just a hypothesis or an educated guess. It has to be a proposed explanation based on some evidence, based on some data that you already have.
Okay.
And so there's really 3 elements to a strong or a smart hypothesis. And those 3 elements are: number 1, you should define your test conversion goal in the first place. So what are you trying to get out of making improvements to your website? Is it more leads? Is it more e-commerce sales? What is that conversion goal? And that's going to be the framework that orients you for the entire rest of the process. Identify your target audience and the conversion problem that you see based on the data that you've already ascertained. So you may think you have a perfect site, but if your site is not converting well, you clearly don't have a perfect site. Why not? What is it that's causing users to abandon or not convert? We need to identify that finite conversion problem and then come up with a suggested solution within the hypothesis. And the really key part of a hypothesis that most marketers miss is you want to state the anticipated outcome so that you can measure it properly. And you want to describe how you think results are going to improve the situation. So this is a smart hypothesis. And I have a little formula that I've come up with, and I'm going to share it with you. And what it goes is, because I observed, and then whatever that data is that you observe, and I receive feedback on. That's really incorporating knowing your audience. I believe that, and then you state whatever you're going to do. 4, and you define your specific target audience, because there's different traffic and there's different traffic channels. And then you say your outcome will result in, and ideally get as specific as possible with your conversion metrics and what you're hoping to achieve. And by zoning in and focusing on that hypothesis, you can ensure that your experiment is set up properly so that you're measuring what you intended to measure and getting out of it what you hoped to get out of it.
So this is something that we'll definitely have completed before we launch an experiment. That's a really good one. Why don't you take us through what we have to do next?
All right, so you've set up your hypothesis. Now you need to figure out how you're actually going to test this hypothesis. So you mentioned version A, or the control, which is the original version that you have on your website. Now you're going to create a new version that targets that hypothesis and optimizes, hopefully, the experience. But you need a way to be able to test it properly. And this is where A/B testing comes into play. So conversion rate optimization is kind of the overarching parent to a very specific gold standard method of experimentation, which is A/B testing. And in A/B testing, just as it sounds, you literally pit version A of a website against version B of a website. And version B is changes that you've determined are going to hopefully help optimize your site, and those are implemented. So you need to, first of all, design version B, usually through a wireframe, and then ideally working with a designer to make it look good. And then you need to implement version B by actually setting up and running an A/B test. And to do that, you need to choose an A/B testing software or platform and get the test set up and running. Now, what an A/B test will do is it will show the control, or version A, and your new version, version B, at the same time to your traffic concurrently. Typically, half of users are going to see version A, and the other half of users are going to see version B. And it's just randomly kind of split one way or the other. And you're going to be able to look at the data and say, okay, all of those users who saw the control version A, they're not converting. But with our changes with version B, wow, we've just increased our conversion rate X percent, and now we're generating more leads, or we're bringing in way more revenue. So you need to be monitoring the data, look at the data, know how to analyze the data properly so that you get a statistically significant result. And that's a whole conversation in itself. But there's calculators that can help you determine statistical significance and that you've achieved a large enough sample size to get a large valid result. And then, most importantly, and this is an obvious one, but a lot of people don't do it, you need to implement that winning design. And people will test, and then they'll sit on a winning design while they'll say, well, I don't really like it, or I'm not so sure about it. But if it's a winner, implement it. Then, once it's implemented, you need to actually monitor it and make sure that it's achieving the conversion gains that you hoped long term. Because if you implement it and you let it sit and you forget about it, it actually could decrease revenue if, for example, it's not in line with your product life cycle or your consumers change or something like that. So you always want to be monitoring the tests that you've designed and implemented. A lot of marketers don't do that, I think about it.
Well, I mean, we are in an age where we're being exposed on all sides to people who run scientific trials and tests. Having gone through the pandemic, we are getting these numbers and we get the qualifiers with them. You mentioned confidence and statistical significance. Uh, let's talk about that for a quick second, because that last point you raised about we have to actually run something that had been only to 50% of the people, but now is going to be seen by 100% of our people. I think it's time to temper some expectations, right? And like, this is that little part where, if this were a commercial, the little fine print would be appearing, like plus or minus 3%, 19 times out of 20.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
like, let's just take a moment and delve into, because let's imagine we're marketers that have to go to our C-suite and explain what we've done and explain how we feel about this. What have we actually done with the A/B test? Have we? Okay, let's be clear what we haven't done. We haven't actually gone and picked out 50% of people who we know that everybody out there will look like them. Okay, so we've got a little bit of a sampling issue. What we're trying to do is draw an extrapolation from it. But I think the other side that's more important is to tease out that we found a correlation, right? And what we are trying to do is we are actually trying to see if the end point of what our page did to them was actually what is influencing the behavior compared to
Mm-hmm.
all the other things which could be influencing the behavior of the masses.
Mm-hmm. Right, you got it. So you're always going to have what are known as outliers, people who behave differently than the general population. But what you can do with an A/B test and why it's so powerful is you can see by and large how is my population or my traffic or my user cohort behaving when they see one version of the website versus the other. And in doing so, you can make general assumptions and you can say, okay, half of the users saw version A, and the conversion rate on this page is 0.5%. That's pretty low. The other half of users saw version B, and the conversion rate on this page is 3%. That's much higher. There's something in this version B that we changed that is working really well
Well,
for our.
so that 2.5% is a big enough difference that it cannot be accounted for by anything other than the change that we made.
Right. And so what you do, and it gets pretty complex and statistical, but you have, as you mentioned, a confidence level that says we have 95% confidence that this is going to work. 5% there's a margin of error, or this is not a repeatable experiment. This happened due to random chance, but we're pretty sure, we're 95% certain that this is going to be a repeatable experiment if we're to do it again. And in doing so, you get statistically significant valid results. Now, there's a whole plethora of statistical terminology in order to be able to calculate that properly, but that's kind of the essence and the idea. So these experiments are not based on whim, they're based on very specific statistical calculations that show this is going to work and be a repeatable, reliable experiment 95% of the time.
And so we don't have to be on the hook for doing those calculations. Let's talk about the tools. They do handle that heavy lifting, as well as the traffic copying of putting version A or version B in front of people. What do we need to think about as we're considering the tools? I know that some are free, some are paid. What guidance can you give?
Okay, so there's two things you need to think of right off the bat. The first is, do you want to go with a free tool or a paid tool? Now, free tools are great. An example is Google Optimize. Many agencies I know run all their experiments on Google Optimize, and it's a fantastic tool. It's free, it's powerful, but it does require a little bit more setup, and you have to be a little bit more versed in using both Google Optimize itself and Google Analytics, which it plugs right into. The other side of the coin is paid tools. Some big names are Optimizely, Visual Website Optimizer, VWO, Adobe Target for enterprise level. These are some of the main tools, but they're paid and they can get really expensive very quickly. The trade off is you get a lot more functionality, it's a lot more plug and play, and you don't have to be plugging in different analytics tools just to get the data. Most of it is within the platform itself. So you can be a little bit more self sufficient within the platform. So that's number one. Do you want to go free or paid? Because there's trade offs with either. Number two is, are you going to go with a Bayesian or a frequentist method of testing?
All right. So this is probably the point where we jump in and say, yeah, folks, there's going to be a moment of statistical explanation here, but I promise Deborah is going to take us back into the land of, happy marketing and not having to worry about it. But yes, we have to deal with these frameworks.
Yeah. So you have to know, just by and large, you don't have to understand it completely, but you have to know by and large that marketers will say one framework is better than another. The supposed advantage of Bayesian, which is what Google Optimize runs on, is that you can get results quicker and with less traffic. A frequentist method is the standard way that A/B tests have run for a long time, and a platform like Optimizely or Adobe will be using frequentist. The disadvantage is that it generally takes longer to get a significant amount of traffic for your test results. The advantage is that it's a more proven scientific method that's been used for a long time. So you just have to be aware that different platforms have different statistical frameworks or models, because that's going to affect the way that you acquire results and how quickly it's going to take for you to get results. But it won't necessarily change results. The reporting of the results will be a little bit different though. So that's factor number two. And then there's a third factor that I think is important to consider, especially if you're an agency and you're running a lot of tests for clients, which is that you are going to start to amass a lot of tests if you run them frequently for clients in a certain platform like Optimizely or Google Optimize. And if you have 5 or 6 different platforms going, especially if you're an agency, your tests are going to be all over the place and it's going to be really hard to kind of reference them. And so you're doing yourself a favor if you can stick to one specific platform and keep all your tests and all your data in that platform, because then you're not having to go, oh, I think that test was for this client was in this platform and this test for that client was in this platform. Everything's housed centrally in one kind of repository, and it makes your management of it a lot easier.
Yes, you're telling us we have to practice monogamy with these tools.
Right. I guess that's one way of looking at it.
You're okay. You've also cracked open the door on something that we haven't talked about, which is that no test is an island, right? We have a number of things that we should be looking at on our websites to improve them. So I'll play devil's advocate for a sec. Let's say I'm a marketer and I'm hearing you talk about these two frameworks, and one takes a little longer than the other. And I say to myself, well, I can't wait that long. So what I want to do is I want to stretch that sentence that you gave me, and I'm going to chuck about 3 or 4 things in there, and I'm going to come up with 8 pages, not just 2 that I want to test. And that means I'll get an answer in 1/4 of the time. I won't have to run a test after a test after a test. Am I right?
Sure, you can do that. You just need to make sure you have enough traffic to do that validly. So with every page or with every iteration, so you can have what's called an ABN test. The N stands for any number of different test variants. You can have version A, version B, version C, D, E, as many as you want. But for every version, you need a statistically significant amount of traffic to be able to test and measure and make sure that experience works or doesn't. So let's say you want to test 5 different variants. Let's call it on your homepage. You're welcome to do that. but you need enough traffic to run it across 5 different.
Okay,
Um,
let's say I have under 500 visitors a month to my site.
okay, if you have under 500 visitors a month, I would actually recommend reconsidering the idea of A/B testing altogether.
Gotcha.
Um, Unfortunately, with A/B testing, you do need a certain amount of traffic to make the results valid, and you need to attain those results within a certain amount of time. And best practice is generally about 2 to 6 weeks, and that's for two reasons. One, your user cohort over time is going to change, and two, um, if the test runs for too long, then there's going to be kind of a muddying of the data over time. Things are going to
Okay.
ebb and flow, and
Okay. And
you know,
the one I always think about with that shelf life one is if we imagine Facebook, right? So if they were running tests back in the day, and yes, I know they have a lot of traffic, but the idea that we can just slap results that we did at one time to a much later time, the fallacy there is you take Facebook, back in the day, they had 20 somethings on the platform. They've all, aged up. And the issue is that the audience that we now have on Facebook is nothing like what it was back when it started.
right, you got it. Yeah, so audience segments will inevitably change over time as your product or your service evolves. And you need to continually be speaking to that audience and monitoring who that shifting cohort is. And that, in addition to the fact that you have different sources or traffic channels. You might have paid traffic, you might have organic traffic, you might have direct traffic, and all those different channels are coming in with different needs and desires and exposure to your product or service, and they're going to have a different way of relating to your site as a result.
So, yeah, let's take that one on for a second because in this quest for enough traffic in a short enough period of time, I'm already hearing that we may want to keep our number of variants down because the traffic needs just climb.
Yep.
But the other caution note that you sounded there was about just bumping up our traffic with a lot of paid visitors.
Hmm.
So you said they have different motivations or different exposure to the product.
Right.
So is this completely inadmissible, or do you think that there are cases where you can do it as long as f- beware of some special caveats?
Yeah. So I think the second is definitely permissible. So basically, when you run a test with paid traffic, you can do it one of two ways. You can include paid traffic in your overall traffic, or you can use only paid traffic. I would advise that if you're going to run a test with paid traffic, you use only paid traffic because that paid traffic is going to behave likely a lot more different than, let's say, organic traffic that maybe they're return visitors and they're loyal and they already know a lot about your site. Paid traffic is going to have different needs and different desires, and you're going to have to speak to them in a different way. And so it's perfectly legitimate to run a test with only paid traffic. Might be a bit expensive to do so. But you're going to have to keep in mind when you're done the test and you implement it that the results may vary if you're now exposing that variant to all of your traffic. So I would say for paid traffic, a really good setup would be that you have a landing page that you're continually sending paid traffic to, and that landing page is only for paid traffic.
Right, that's a
Maybe,
way out of it. Yep, just duplicate that page.
right?
However, while it may not be inside of the parameters of your test, I'd counter by saying if you are using a page like that as a standalone, sometimes called an orphan page or a squeeze page that is only for your paid traffic, if there is something about the user experience that you uncover and you improve, and you notice that your regular site pages have that same issue, what we found and normally roll out is asking the client make that change to those other pages of the site, provided it's not too disruptive, because now you've improved how the site performs for anybody coming. Your overall conversion rate goes up.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, that makes a lot of sense.
The one other thing I think it's important to caution people on, you've outlined well that we need to think of tests as always being rolling, but we also have to be aware of pushing too many tests in at once. So with that example, we have paid traffic going to a landing page. It's not a good idea to, at that very same time, be messing around too much with your ad copy and trying to do an A/B test on ads, because the rotation of those ads is not something you can control. And as you said, the exposure is different. So this is going to skew results.
Absolutely, yeah. So generally, as a best practice, A/B testing is actually a very slow and iterative process. You change ideally one element on your site one at a time, one page at a time, and you see how that affects your traffic and your conversion rates, and then you optimize from there. That's the best practice. That's the ideal way to do it. Now, that's not to say everyone does it that way. I've certainly seen a lot of agencies, especially testing agencies, that need to make their clients happy, and they're testing multiple pages on the site at a time, and they're making multiple changes. What the problem is it becomes really hard to know what effect any one change has anywhere within your funnel or on your site.
Yeah.
And so you're not able to identify with much clarity what's causing the conversion gain or potentially decline. And it becomes a lot more guesswork at that point.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. You can find out stuff, but if you don't set it up properly, you end up finding out nothing, and you've lost that time.
Absolutely.
If we're talking about how we could skew things, let's talk about maybe misinterpreting results. We're only human, and even the best, most conclusive result might get us wrong. What do we do, though, for example, if a test is inconclusive? How do we respond to that? Are we at a dead end, or what do you suggest?
Yeah, so there's a couple of reasons a test can be inconclusive. One, if you don't have enough traffic, you're just not going to be able to definitively determine if it's a winning or losing variant. Another reason could be that you don't have a significant conversion uplift or decrease between the control version, the original version, and the winning or the new variant that you implemented. And so you get an insignificant result. So what's a marketer to do at that point? Well, you have a couple choices. You can say, it didn't really work. We're just going to keep the original version. That seems to be performing equally or just as well. And you call it a day for that test variant. You can implement the new version because, let's say, you like it better or it seems to be performing ever so slightly better. Or you can say, okay, well, this didn't really move the needle, but let's retest this, change things up a little bit, and find something that does have a significant effect. And from there, you can learn from the experiment and continue to optimize on it or iterate on it and get something that is really going to have an effect. So I don't think any test is ever a failure as long as you learn something from it. You can have a test that doesn't win, and that's a test that has failed. But if you learn something from it and can improve upon it, you have a winning test, even if it doesn't actually win in terms of numbers.
Yeah, I like that. And there is this nature to traffic and the statistical measuring of it that will always see that little dial bouncing up and down a little bit. The best way I can encourage people to find out about this is run a test where they're already sending two types of traffic to the exact same page, and it's an AA test, right? Tell us why that's a good idea.
Yeah, so an AA test is actually a really important way to start testing if you've never done testing before. What you do is you set up a test in a testing platform and you direct half of traffic to version A, which is the exact same version as the other version, also called version A. So you're splitting 50% of traffic to version A and the other 50% of traffic to your other version A. And it sounds a little bit ludicrous to be doing this. Why on earth would you set up a test where you're splitting traffic that's going to the exact same page? Well, the reason is because, first of all, there may be a bug in your software or you haven't set up the test properly. And you're not going to know that until you run an AA test and you get the results back, With an AA test, actually, what you want to see is no change or no difference between version A and
That
version A.
makes sense.
um, but also, I actually have an example on my site, Guess the Test, a very prominent testing organization, AutoCAD. They run tests, hundreds of tests, maybe thousands of tests a year. They ran an AA test and they got statistically significant different results between version A and version B. And these are experienced testers and they know what they're doing. So you ask yourself, how could this possibly happen? It's because things aren't set up properly. It's because there's bugs in the system. It's because the data isn't being analyzed properly. These are all things that happen even to the best of us. And an AA test is kind of a foolproof way of doing a sanity check and making sure that everything is working the way that you want it to. So,
Hmm.
especially when you're new to testing, I recommend doing an AA test just to make sure it's all running smoothly. But if you have enough traffic at the best of times, I recommend you actually do an AAB test. And what that will do is it will send two user cohorts to version A, and the other one to version B. And then what you should see is there's no difference
Ah,
between version A and version A, but there is a difference between version A and
right.
version B.
A sub 1 and A sub 2, you could put either of them up against B, and yeah, that's
Right.
good. It sounds like
And it
you're
should be.
it sounds like you're running your tool through a lie detector test.
Yeah, pretty much. Exactly.
And so we've got that skew. There's another skew, I guess, that happens, and that's the bias that we bring in, maybe even all the way back at steps number 1 and 2 of your process. Because if we're doing it internally, especially if we're the very people or team who built the website, there are things that, we look at the world and we look at the world with certain eyes, and we aren't able to necessarily objectively get down to the hypothesis. So I guess this is where we ask, should we go outside and use a testing agency or testing expert to do this? Can you make the case for that?
Um, I mean, I have a bit of a vested interest, and I would say absolutely go outside. But if you have the internal tools and internal resources to be able to do it correctly and competently, I think that's fine. But you do have to be careful, as you said, with that kind of inherent bias. People become very attached to their websites and their work. And I work with a lot of clients that say to me, fix my website. But what they really mean is fix my website, but don't change anything.
Ah,
And um, it's a difficult job to optimize something if you don't actually want to change it. So you need to be open-minded to the fact that there are ways potentially to improve something that you've already done. Even if it's performing well, you can still optimize upon it. And working with an outside team or even colleagues who have a fresh perspective will probably help you see things that you don't necessarily see, as well as really using the data, because the data, if it's interpreted correctly, it doesn't lie. It will tell you what's working and what's not working, and you can use that as your sort of confidant to sanity check things and make sure that what you think is going to work will actually work.
yeah. And I would say it even extends to the presentation of results. Having an outside person who has no access to grind does help, especially when it's going up to leadership and you need to say to them, we have to make some changes. We are, removing ourselves from power dynamics. There's someone out here who has this data, and they don't really, they don't know the players in our organization. It doesn't matter to them, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Deborah, if people want to find out more, we're going to have a lot of this in the show notes. But if they want to check out Guess the Test or your regular website for your consulting business, could you please tell us where to send them?
Sure. So if people are interested in A/B testing and want to learn more, I've created a digital marketing resource called guessthetest.com. That's GUESS, the test.com. And people can go there. They can take their best guess on the featured test, see if they win, and apply the findings to optimize their own success. There's hundreds of tests available in all different industry verticals and with different conversion objectives. And you can have fun taking your best guess on all the different tests and then applying the learnings to optimize your own success. If you're interested in having consulting work done for you, either testing or conversion rate optimization, or maybe you just want an audit on your website to see how well it's performing, I can do that for you as well. And that's through convertexperts.com. And I will be happy to work with you and optimize your site for you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, Deborah.
Thank you. It was great to speak with you, Glenn.
And for our listeners who've listened through to the end, thank you. I hope you got a lot of value out of this. And I encourage you to think of someone that you can share this with so that they can also get the benefit of what Deborah was talking about with CRO. And I just want to thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.